The Hatton W. Sumners Foundation is committed to self-government. So too are our outstanding distinguished guests. Our speakers have both run presidential campaigns, intriguingly against each other in the year 2000, worked in and around the media, advised key political figures, and held leadership positions in the Republican Party of Texas and the Democratic National Committee. More specifically, Ambassador Karen Hughes also served as Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs, where she led the U.S. State Department's effort to communicate America's values abroad. She's the author of 10 Minutes from Normal, a title that came to her on a train, and is currently the worldwide vice chair at Burson Marsteller, a leading global public relations and communications firm. She is a Phi Beta Kappa and summa cum laude graduate of Southern Methodist University and worked early in her career as a television news reporter for the NBC affiliate in Dallas-Fort Worth. Donna Brazile is a political strategist, adjunct professor, and political commentator. She has served as vice chair of voter registration and participation at the Democratic National Committee, is the author of Cooking with Grease, Stirring the Pots in American Politics, and is the founder and managing director of Brazile and Associates, a consulting, grassroots advocacy, and training firm in Washington, D.C. She's been active in working for the full recovery of her beloved New Orleans and has dabbled in acting, appearing in such shows as The Good Wife, House of Cards, and
Being Mary Jane.
Very nice. We are so proud to have these guests with us because when they speak, people listen. In their careers, they have influenced presidents, world dignitaries, CEOs, organizations, and students alike. We are also truly lucky to have them with us, as they are known from their wisdom, their warmth, and their wit. We are going to begin today with a few prepared questions, and then we will shift into the questions that Megan briefed you we're taking from the audience. But please join me in offering a welcome to our guests.
Thank you. Yes.
We're going to start with our first question to Karen. What is your first political memory?
Well, I'll tell you about that, but first I just want to say thank you quickly to you, Dr. Jarvis, and to the Annette Strauss Institute for having us, and I want to welcome my friend Donna back to Austin. She was here earlier this year, so we've been fortunate to have her here a couple of times, and I really appreciate Donna and the Strauss Institute for promoting civic discourse, even when we disagree, so thank you. And my first political memory, it's really funny. It's a memory of, I don't remember how old I was, but I came home, and I noticed that all of our neighbors had yard signs, and we didn't. And I asked my parents because they always talked about politics, and it turns out because my dad was in the Army, he felt that it was not appropriate for him to get involved in political campaigns, that he would vote and keep that privately, but he wouldn't get involved in campaigns. So that's my very first memory. I thought it was strange that everybody else had yard signs and we didn't at my house. And then my first campaign I worked in was, I was a student at SMU, and I got involved in Alan Steelman's campaign for Congress in Dallas and walked door to door, which was really fun. But I really fell in love with politics, and this is ironic, at the Democratic National Convention in 1976. Because a journalism professor of mine at SMU took a group of students to the convention. And I just remember the energy and the speakers, and it was so dynamic, and it was so exciting to see, you know, people participating in our great American democracy. So that's where I fell in love with politics.
Yeah, that's great. I fell in love with politics again in 1976. I was still underage, not ready to vote. But Barbara Jordan gave the keynote speech that year, and she was such an amazing, gifted, talented, strong, steely magnolia, and she really influenced me to continue my journey in politics. I was already volunteering, working for Jimmy Carter campaign. In fact, I organized a rally in the French Quarter. Anybody been in New Orleans, you know, well, that's a good place to have a rally. Even when you're not looking for a crowd, anybody who's walking out with a to-go cup and beer, you know that's a good time. But I actually got started at a very early age. I was 9 years old when I formally began to go door to door, urging my friends to ask their parents if they were registered to vote. There were probably two events that really shaped my beginning. Of course, the assassination of John F. Kennedy. I'm Catholic. And the fact that my parents mourned the death of John F. Kennedy and talked about the Kennedy family throughout my childhood. And of course, Lyndon Johnson. I'm a kid who got a head start in life 50 years ago, so you can figure out my age. I'm 55. And I thank Lyndon Johnson for the great and tremendous leadership of the Great Society program. But there's no question, on that Thursday afternoon when we came home from school and my grandmother Frances called us in order our birth, Cheryl, Sheila, Donna, Teddy, Chet, Lisa, Dimitri, Kevin, Zilla, come into my room. And we sat down. We didn't know what was going on. And she said, I have bad news, but I want you all to pray because that's something we did all the time. And she said that Dr. King had been shot. Well, later that evening, we learned that he was murdered, that Dr. King had been assassinated. That was perhaps the first moment when I did an act of civil disobedience that caused my mother to punish me. But it was one that I did out of love for Dr. King and the journey that he was on for equality for all, and that is, I went outside, I took a headscarf, and I put a black, that was the only thing I could find that was black, and I just wanted everybody in the neighborhood to know that our family was mourning too. Well, I took my mother's headscarf, and I went outside at dark without her permission, so you know what I got punished. That began my lifelong, I think, love for politics, love for community action, love for social activism, but more importantly, love for my country. And so that's my beginning. And I'm still on that journey. I'm still that little girl who will take a headscarf and put it on the door if needed, but still a little girl who wants to make change possible in this country for all Americans.
Karen mentioned that you survived the 2000 campaigns. Were you in communication much at that point?
No.
No.
And I just saw, no. Hell no. Hey, in war, you at war. And you know, it's funny because the day after the campaign is over, and you're like, how you doing? You made it? You survived? I can only imagine what happens in James Carville and Mary Matlin's house.
Yes.
You know, I just saw Karen on CNN, the special Bush v. Gore. That was a very disappointing campaign, but you know, it's democracy. We participate in it. We all get involved, we get engaged, we get our hands dirty, we go out there and we do the very best job. I often tell people my job was to get out the vote, not to count the vote. Clearly, I wish I would have figured out how to count the vote. But, you know, the truth be told, you know, the Supreme Court was the final say, and I'll never forget when I got the call from Al Gore, and he said, shut it down. I'm like, but we, and he said, shut it down. I look back, and, you know, at the time, I was like, what the hell are you talking about? But I look back and say, okay, that was a moment in history, and I hope that we have the power as a country to continue to make changes on ensuring that every vote is counted, but making sure that people have access to the ballot. That's what drives democracy, and that's why democracy is the lifeblood of our country.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like for you and Vice President Gore. I'll tell you that I saw my colleague Joe Albaugh was on that show, and he said that they were the worst 36 days of his life. I just remember it was just excruciating. I mean, Donna knows the only thing that gets you through a campaign, the final months, because it's so awful, is the knowledge that come election day, it's over. And then come election day, it wasn't over. And I felt like the only thing I could compare it to is like running a marathon, and you cross the finish line, and they say, well, it's really not over, keep running, and we'll let you know when you can stop. And, you know, so it was just an awful 36 days, and I just can only imagine what it was like for you. I mean, when it ended for us, we had something to look forward to. We had
Jobs.
to begin. We had to
running
begin
a free world.
We had to begin governing, and so.
I went to Harvard Institute of Politics to recover. And that's when I wrote my book, Cooking with Grease.
On the notion of stirring the pot, you know, many people worry that political discourse has coarsened since Campaign 2000. Is incivility really a problem today?
Yes.
I think so. I mean, we have a leading Republican presidential contender who seems to be making a name for himself by going around insulting his fellow candidates. And I mean, I think that's kind of appalling, frankly. I can't imagine the President of the United States. I can't imagine having a President of the United States who just seems to be totally unconstrained by anything, including any sense of decency or honorable conduct. So yes, I do think it's a problem. And I think the stridency on both the left and right is a challenge for our country. It makes good people not want to be involved.
That's
I
right.
was with a group of business leaders, women and CEOs of their companies, and they were asked would they ever consider running for office, and they all looked horrified because they just think it's so ugly and nasty that they didn't want to be a part of it. And I couldn't help but think how sad that is, that this talent for our country is turned off to the extent that they wouldn't consider participating.
Can I tell a story? And I'll watch the clock so I won't go overboard because, you know, I'm Catholic, but I have Baptist tendencies. You know, first of all, I want to just say from a personal point of view, I want to say to everyone in this room, and some of you who know me very well in this room know that this comes from the heart. 10 years ago, one of the worst disasters ever to hit our shores in Louisiana and Mississippi, of course, occurred, Hurricane Katrina. It was a really, really tough moment, and I'm grateful for all of you in this room, especially those of you who took time out of your busy lives to volunteer, to allow people from Louisiana to stay in your homes, to feed them, to clothe them, to find them jobs until they were able to get back home. And I know many of them are still here. I can only look at the menu these days in Texas to know that you got a few Louisianians in the house. All right, all right.
You got a few good restaurants out of all that.
Hell yeah, and I'm sure a lot
stay.
of good music. And if you see to-go cups, leave them alone. But, you know, it was at that moment when I realized how important relationships really are in politics. I mean, I had the ability to pick up the phone and call my friend Karl Rove. When I said to my liberal friends, Karl Rove is a friend, he's a friend, he's a friend. I actually care about Karl Rove. I was in Africa with Karl Rove and Jeb Bush in 2009, and they didn't bring any malaria pills. I mean, you should have seen them. We don't have malaria pills. And I was like, where are the mosquitoes? And they're like, what are you doing? I said, mosquitoes. And then when I said that, I said, here are the mosquitoes, and I gave them some of my malaria pills. I mean, I picked up the phone and called Karl Rove, 456-2020. I said, Karl, we need help, and I want to help you help us in Louisiana. That began a 3-year, in my judgment, one of the most important 3 years of my life in politics. I went over practically every week of my life, starting in November of 2005 until he left office in 2009, January 9th, and I saw the president. Now, did I vote for him? No. I voted for the other guy. I worked for the other guy. But I had an opportunity, a unique opportunity, to help my fellow citizens in Louisiana and Mississippi and the Gulf Coast. And you know what? President George W. Bush was open to me being at the table, and he listened to me. We had more conversations about how to rebuild the levees, how to restructure the schools, how to rebuild the roads. And you know, this past summer, and I got to say this with my choking, I had an opportunity to cut the ribbon for a hospital that George W. Bush committed to build. It was the hospital that folks like me, poor people, charity hospital. It's a new level 1 trauma hospital right in the downtown heart of Louisiana because George Bush committed to rebuild Charity Hospital, rebuild the VA. I didn't care about his political persuasion, his ideology, or whatever his. I cared about the fact of his character, that he wanted to help rebuild. So let's get back to civility. It starts with looking at the person sitting across from you. That's your opponent in an election, but that's not your enemy. That's the person you're working against because you believe the person you're working for is the better person. He's the leader. She's the leader. Yes, she's the leader. But it's important that we understand that we value relationships in politics. We don't demonize people. I've gotten to know at least 4 or 5 of the Republican candidates. I can't tell you I've gotten to know Mr. Trump. Keep that hair together. I am so afraid of running into this man. I went to the Iowa State Fair and they had food and I said, I'm not going over there because Mr. Trump, I don't want him to call me fat. But the truth of the matter is I've gotten to know a lot of them. I tweet out things about them. I tweet out things about Chris Christie. When I agree, I tweet. Okay, when I disagree, I tweet. But the fact is,
I told Donna, I follow her Twitter feed. So I found myself the other night watching the debate and I was reading the Twitter feed almost as much as I was listening to the candidates. I don't know what that says about us, but.
But civility is important. It is respecting differences. It's listening to your partner or your friend or whoever and just understanding that you can still respect them. You can disagree without being disagreeable. So we need more civility in politics. We need people to be able to cross the aisle and not demonize one another for doing such a thing. That's very important in American politics. And I yield the rest of my time.
A moment ago, Karen mentioned Donald Trump, and I had the unique opportunity to overhear the two of them chatting in the green room, which was wonderful. And they had some concerns with the last presidential debate. if you could have asked the first question, what would it have been?
Why do you want to be president? I think, you know, we agreed. I mean, I think Donna said that, but we need to understand, as Donna said, you need to understand the heart and the character of these candidates. That's really what's important, because the issues are important, no doubt. And when I worked for President Bush, he believed in using campaigns to talk about issues and to build public support for things that he wanted to accomplish once he was in office. But the thing that defined his presidency, September 11th, we never talked about. I don't remember him ever once being asked about Al-Qaeda during the course of that 2000 campaign, not once. And 7 months into his presidency, they attacked our country. So you can't always predict what a president will be confronted with. And so I think what we want to know from these candidates is, why are they doing this? What motivates them? What is their true sense of duty to the public? What are they like? What makes them tick? And I thought, the questions, I mean, I agree that people who run for president ought to be able to answer tough questions. There's a difference between tough questions and kind of snarky questions, and I think in that debate, the line was crossed several times.
I totally agree. And I know one of the moderators very well, always respected his work, and I just think that when you start asking someone about them being a comic book figure, that's just a little bit below the belt. Look, these debates should inform us about the candidates, about their vision of the country, their values, where they intend to take the country, how they intend to lead a divided country, a diverse country. We should not get into what I call personal snarky attacks and attributes. We have other ways of figuring out those issues. That's what the internet is for. That's why my ex-boss invented it, so you can get there, virtually. Unless you've been retweeted 3 times, it's not true. So I really do believe that hopefully at the next debate and the following debates, we get an opportunity to get to know more about their. Karen, I don't know about you, but I get so frustrated that when we have to sit down and prepare, we have to read the newspaper. We got to know about the tax policy. We got to know how many jobs were created. We got to know about the GDP. We got to know all of this stuff to appear to be smart. And I'm going to say something women, we have to over-prepare ourselves, okay, just to get to the first base sometime. And yet I sit there and I'm like, why do I know all about the tax code, growth, the growth rate even in China in the last quarter, and nobody's getting to these big questions. And yet you get one of these stupid questions like, why do you like pink ties? When Mr. Huckabee started saying, well, I got a Donald Trump tie, I'm like, I didn't even understand that. I'm like, what the? So I hope the next debate is filled with substance and less sound bites.
Donna just mentioned women, and both of you have careers in politics and in the media. And which path do you think is more open to women and minorities?
Boy, that's tough. I started my career in television, and I had a lot of women role models. Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison had been a television reporter before I was. She was a little older than I was. The anchor woman at our TV station was a woman, one of the anchor women. There was a woman named Bobby Wygant who had started as a secretary back in the 1940s and worked her way up to having her own entertainment show on the television station. So I had role models in the media. Not a lot probably, but there were women, and women. I think there's a lot of access now for women in the media. You can, write blogging, for example. There's so many women who become well known by writing a blog on something they care about, cooking, or I'm a fan of Gina Homolka that writes the Skinny Taste cookbook, and she has the Skinny Taste blog, and she's basically built an empire by developing and posting to the internet fun recipes that you can cook that are good for you. So I think there's a lot of access in media. I think there's access in politics. There still aren't nearly enough women. I think maybe the conversation might be a little more civil if there were more women in politics, and more women willing to run for office.
I've worked on 7 presidential campaigns, 56 congressional campaigns as House and Senate, and local campaigns. I've worked in 49 states. One more state, I'm going to become Miss USA without the bikini. And yet I feel at times that I'm a retired politician, that I don't really feel like I need to work on another campaign, although I'm motivated at times to work at the local level because I'm worried about our school system. I really like the job of office of a mayor because you're hands-on. You actually get to feel the potholes and remove the debris and all this other good stuff that I like to do, clean the parks, something else that I'm very good at, I think. But here's the truth, is that the opportunities exist for women today and minorities to enter the political field. Since the beginning of our democracy, only 2% of the American peoples have filled all of these, hundreds of thousands of positions. Only 2%. And as you all know, the majority of the 2%, come from white males. We have an opportunity to transform that. Women are the majority of the population. The millennials are now the largest group of Americans who will be voting in the 2016 election cycle. Minorities, blacks and Hispanics comprise of well over 30% of the voting age population. There are at least 7 states that will determine the presidency where African Americans and Latinos will be the difference in terms of who gets to the White House. So with all of this political power, why are we not using it to make our country stronger and more prosperous in the future? That is a question I think all of you have to ask yourselves, is why not? Why not you? And why you? Because there's no one better. And why now? Because tomorrow's not soon enough. So I would like to encourage people in this room not to wait till you're 65, but to think now about a career in politics, to figure out your seat at the table. And by the way, when we talk about having seats at the table for women and minorities, we're not asking anybody to leave the room or to remove themselves from the table. We're just saying scoot over and make room for others to serve. And to help make this a stronger, more prosperous and secure country in the future.
Donna just mentioned voters. Karen, here's a 2-part question. What is one thing that you would like more Democratic voters to do? And what is one thing that you'd like more Republican voters to do?
Ooh, I think I'd like people on both sides to be more willing to vote for the best candidate and to cross over occasionally if warranted. I've never really liked straight ticket voting. I like to think about the quality of the candidate. Obviously, their position and their philosophy. I always say all politics comes down to a choice, and perfect is never on the ballot. So you have to think about the candidates. So I think I'd like people on both sides to be more open to voting for the quality of the candidate rather than the label attached to the name on that candidate.
What would I like more Democratic voters to do? Vote. I mean, Democrats are like cicadas. They come out every 4 years. I mean, and then they go home and say, well, no, voting is like the World Series. It's happening every year. Seriously, I agree with Karen. I like people to vote their values and not their labels. And these labels are very misleading. I mean, people look at me and assume all of the things that, well, you must be doing. Oh, why don't you ask me my views and my values? I'll never forget Karen, you'll like this. So, when you work for candidates when you're a young person, and everyone assumed that, well, because I'm black, I can organize black people. Well, hell, I know black people. I don't mind organizing them. And though, well, you're young, you can organize students. Well, I'm a student, I can organize them. You're a woman. So I did all of the black, the female, the young thing, the identity politics. And I finally met a candidate, and I'll never forget, I was on a plane, we were going out to California, and he wanted to interview me, and he looked across, and this was Dick Gephardt. And he said, well, what do you think about trade with the Koreans? I almost jumped out of my seat. I'm like, what? Where's the exit row? I don't trade with Korea. No, it really forced me at that point to realize that this was the first time someone valued my opinion, not just on those traditional women's issues or minority issues, which, of course, I'm always willing to play that role. By the way, whenever somebody calls me, this is what happened in 2008. They say, oh, Donna, you're black. I'm like, okay. Donna, you're a woman. Okay. And then they kept saying, but you're going to be for Obama. You're going to be for Hillary. I'm like, wait a minute. I'm getting old and grumpy. I might be for McCain. There's so much talent that's not being used because we're labeling people, because we've decided that we can't work with somebody because they have an R label or D label. We need to find ways to mix it up to ensure that we're getting the very best people. We're no longer competing Louisiana against Texas or Louisiana against Mississippi. We're competing now Louisiana against India and Russia, because we're competing with young people in those societies that will grow up to grow their economy and secure their future. So we better get smart about what it takes to build America stronger, better, and more prosperous for the future, and we can do it. We have so many tools at our disposal, but we got to utilize them. But that involves everybody in this room understanding that you have a valued place in society, and we need everybody to participate. So I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat. I want great people around me. That's why I'm still teaching at my young age.
I want to make a point, too, though. I'm not saying not to have a label. I say I'm a proud Republican, and I mostly vote Republican because mostly Republican candidates represent my values, and I know Donna feels the same way as a Democrat. So get involved with the party, and I think a party is important. It's a group of like-minded people who are trying to work together to achieve something. So party is important, but I think you have to be willing to look beyond party in the case where candidates maybe don't really represent or you don't think that candidate is the best person.
Find a cause. Find something that is important. Find something that will make the world a better place. And you don't have to go global to find a cause. You can go right in your own neighborhood. There's a library that needs books. There's an after-school program that needs tutors. There are, senior living facilities that need workers, helpers. So find something that you feel comfortable doing. Not all of us are experts, but we are good at something because God gave us something that we're good at. Thank God it took me a couple years to figure that out. I knew when I was 8, my mother used to say, "Shut up." I used to say, "Peace, love, harmony. What does all of that mean?" And of course, she kept saying, "Shut up." I wish my mother had lived long enough to see me work for ABC and CNN and know that I had a purpose. I was just a talk.
all that talk was valuable.
All that talk. I mean, because when you're on cable from 8 to 1 a.m. and the topic is Republican, you better learn how to talk. Because there's a lot of talking you got to do these days on cable television, right? Woo.
Absolutely.
Karen just mentioned the parties, and I have the pleasure of teaching political communication at the University of Texas. Many of our undergrads regard parties to be abstract and remote. Could you tell us one reason why you're proud of your party? Give them one reason to identify with your side.
I'm proud of my party because I believe we believe in American leadership in the world. We believe it's very important for the United States of America because our values are universal values, because we believe in the dignity and value of every single person, because we believe that people should take responsibility for themselves and their families. So we believe that America, because of our, I always say that our founding premise, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, if that is in fact true, and I believe it to my core, then those rights have to be shared and they can't be hoarded because they're endowed by our Creator. And therefore, we have a leadership role, I think, to share those values with the world, to help lead the world, to ensure a better world for not only all of our own citizens, but also citizens across the world.
We're a party of Thomas Jefferson. We're the party of Wilson, who signed the 19th Amendment giving women the right to vote. We're the party of Lyndon Johnson that signed the Voting Rights Act. We're a party of opportunity and inclusion. We're a party that believes that America is stronger and more secure when everyone has a seat at the table. I enjoy being not just a member of the Democratic Party, but a leader of the Democratic Party. When I say a leader of the Democratic Party, I've knocked on more doors and turned over more tables as a leader of the Democratic Party, but I'm proud of a party that believes that every American should have the right to vote and that every American should be able to participate in the political process. But more importantly, on the economic front, we are a party of opportunity. We believe that there should be no American who lives on the outskirts of hope, but every American should be brought into the circle of opportunity. That's the America that we all believe will serve us best, that will keep us strong and secure, and make sure that America has a leading role in the world to play forever and ever. So I'm proud to be a Democrat. I call myself a lame duck leader of the Democratic Party because in 2017, I'm going to do this song called I'm Bustin' Loose. I'm done. I'm going to turn my seat over. I hope somebody young take the next 30 years of their life, mess up their knees, have to wear bifocals, trifocals, spend their Friday nights at, chicken dinners, because I'm going to Beaumont when I'm done, and I'm happy to do it. And but I'm grateful to God that I've had an opportunity to have met so many great, amazing Americans, because I belong to a party that opened doors for others. So thank you for allowing me to serve you if you're a Democrat in this room.
A moment ago, Donna mentioned candidate recruitment, and at the Strauss Institute, we've been researching young voters for the past 15 years, and we know that one barrier, a key barrier, is not that they're not interested, it's just they don't know how. And that extends to their ability to run as candidates as well. What is one key concrete tip that you would give a young person in this room that would enable them to be a more compelling candidate in the future?
I think you have to volunteer. I think you have. My advice to young people is always go be an intern. Show up at, we had young people from across the country who showed up here in Austin, Texas at George W. Bush's campaign headquarters, and they slept in their cars sometimes. They would do anything. They would go take out the garbage and pick up the trash, and by the end of the campaign, some of them were policy people that were working on our policy staff. And one of them came with us to the White House. So I really believe that the advice, find a cause that you believe in and that you feel passionate about, and show up and work and be there and learn. And I've seen young people, campaigns always have a shortage of time and money and people. They never have enough. And so you can go to work at a campaign as a young person, and you will get more responsibility than you would get in corporate America in 10 years. They'll throw anything at you can handle. The best thing that was ever said to me about my son, one of the best, was he went to to South Carolina from California to work on a campaign. And a friend of mine who was on the campaign later told me he would do anything. He would sweep the floor if we needed to before a news conference. And that's, that kind of commitment, that kind of attitude, that kind of willingness to just do whatever it takes is the hallmark of I think, successful campaigns. And it's a great way for a young person to just get involved. And pretty soon you'll find, I can almost promise you, I've seen it happen time and time again, you'll get more responsibility, as much responsibility as you can handle.
I agree with Karen. In fact, I was thinking back, I was becoming this, going back to my youth. I was 21, a fresh graduate out of LSU, hardly any student debt, which is something that I'm really worried about in terms of our young people. But I had the opportunity to go to Washington, D.C., and I was an intern on Capitol Hill working for Gillis Long, who was the leader, one of the leaders in the Democratic Party. And that wasn't enough. Interning on Capitol Hill was great, but wasn't enough for me. I met Coretta Scott King that fall, and she encouraged young people to go out there and help make Dr. King's birthday holiday. It was almost as if they had given up on the fact that we could get a holiday. And I volunteered to not just help organize college campuses, because I was a recent graduate, but also to organize other people. A year later, after Stevie Wonder did a major rally in Washington, D.C., I was the mobilization director. Talk about titles. I went from being just a quote-unquote kid from LSU to the director of mobilization. And the following year, in 1983, we not only had over 7 million signatures that we delivered to Tip O'Neill and President Ronald Reagan, but by that fall, Dr. King's birthday became a national holiday. I thank God that I had to, and by the way, back during those days, they did not pay you. You never got paid. So do not go into politics for money. That is not where you're going to make your bank. But go in there for the opportunities to serve, to make a difference, and to build your future. I mean, from that moment, I learned that you can do just about anything if you put your mind to it. And just imagine a little girl growing up in Kenner, Louisiana, out on the outskirts of the Mississippi River. I never thought I would see a black president in the White House, and I didn't think the potential of a woman president would happen in my lifetime. And yet we have a black president, biracial president in the White House. And you know what? The polls are right. We will likely have a Democratic nominee who's a female, first in the history. Since 1796, we've had 55 nominees, all males. We've had 2 women on the ticket, 1984, 2008. But those tickets did not succeed in getting to the White House. So we have another historic opportunity in 2016. That may not be your politics. I'm neutral. I can't tell you my politics on this one, but I can tell you this. I always say that. I'll tell you, when I saw Hillary Clinton after the Democratic debate, I said, Madam Secretary, you did very well. You're neutral. And I went to Bernie Sanders and told him the same thing. I was looking for Lincoln Chafee, but he had already taken an Uber. Had to say that one.
I want to underscore a point Donna made about money. I actually took a 50% pay cut to take my first job in politics.
Whoa.
And I'd been in television. I was a reporter, and I was negotiating a big new contract. But as a reporter, I fell in love with politics. Because I realized, I remember interviewing a young dairy farmer who was running for the Texas legislature as a Democrat. Yeah. And he was doing it because he saw the regulations out of Austin were impacting negatively his industry and his livelihood and his family and his neighbors in the dairy community. And I saw, he was willing to run for office and get involved and try to make a difference. And I remember covering city council meetings and realizing, that they're deciding the hours that our kids can go to the park and when the library's open. And I would cover the school board and realized that they were making decisions that affected what all of the children were taught in public schools. And so I decided I wanted to be a part of all that, and that's why I left reporting and went to work for the Reagan-Bush campaign as Texas press coordinator. Now that's a pretty low-level title, and I took a 50% pay cut and worked. It was only a 6-month job. It was going to be over. I took the job in April, and it was obviously over come Election Day in November. But you have to be willing to take a risk sometime. And same thing when I almost didn't go to work for George W. Bush. I had moved up in the world. I was running the Republican Party of Texas, and so I was running our whole party operation, multi-million-dollar operation, running candidate schools, and we had a telemarketing operation. Don't ever run a telemarketing operation. It's awful. Worst thing I ever had to do. But I was running all our donor programs and just directing this big party operation. But George W. Bush wanted me to come to work for his campaign for governor. He was viewed as a long shot. Ann Richards was the very popular incumbent at the time. Even his own mother had said that he couldn't win. But I decided that I'd spent 3 years of my life as executive director of the Republican Party trying to pave the way for us to elect a Republican as governor. And then I said I could stand anything for 6 months. So I'd like to joke that 20 years ago I went to work for George W. Bush because I could stand anything for 6 months. I thought it might be a step backwards to go back to being a spokesman for a political campaign, and look how it all turned out. So
there you go.
You have to be willing to take some risks, too, along the way.
A question that many young people have is, how can we become more politically informed? Where do you get your news, and where would you invite them to go for news?
Ooh. I have multiple sources of news. I'm still old-fashioned. I read the newspaper. I read the Austin American this morning. I read the New York Times online, the Washington Post online. I'll probably get a free USA Today somewhere today.
You sound so excited about that.
Hey, LSU is number 2. They play Alabama, so hell. My grandmother Frances, who clearly she was born 25 years after slavery, education, reading, writing, all of that was so important to my grandmother and I loved her so much that I love reading the papers. I love learning about things. I love knowledge. And I can't wait to read my new John Grisham novel and David Baldacci. I got my slutty stuff,
I love those too. That's the only way to take your mind off a campaign, is to read something that's easy.
It's so easy. Yeah. It's wonderful. But I love it. I just love it. And I thank my grandmother for that passion of learning how to read. I don't know, but some days when I'm in my class and you're writing on the blackboard, and nowadays you just hit C-O-N, then all of a sudden conclusion jump. Oh. But I still enjoy writing on the blackboard, looking, trying to develop concepts so that students don't forget the art of writing. Learning how to write, learning how to construct a paper, learning how to put their thoughts across, not in these PPL, OMG ways. Okay, I'm learning that too. But we all need to be better informed citizens and to get our information, not just the information we want to hear. Now, yes, I read the Wall Street Journal, not the editorial page sometimes. But I read the Wall Street Journal, I read the Financial Times, and yes, I watch Fox News. Not all of the shows. I watch Fox News because I don't want to, and I watch MSNBC and CNN, you know. ESPN is my best channel. But I want to learn as much, know as much, so that I can still give back. Because it's all about giving back and paying forward. And the best way to do that, I believe, is to be educated and to learn as much as you possibly can.
Well, I start my morning usually by reading Mike Allen's Political Playbook. It's a good, fast summary. And that way, I like Donna, I'm always worried about missing something. So I want to make sure that I've kind of covered the gamut. So much happens in the political world now with so many candidates. It's hard to keep up. And as a business person now, my life is consumed with meetings with clients, and it's very hard to keep up with everything that's going on in the political world, and yet both Donna and I can always be asked about anything that's going on in the political world. So I start my day with that summary, that kind of gives me a good overview. I too like to read the paper. I get the Austin American Statesman and the Wall Street Journal at home and read those, and get the New York Times on Sunday. So I usually read it online during the week. And I try to read a bunch of the New York Times on Sunday. And then, I get compilations of things. I check sites during the day. I'm signed up to all the news feeds, so I get, CNN and the Wall Street Journal alerts and the Washington Post alerts over the course of the day. So my phone has really become much more of a source of news, I guess, throughout the day now, because I get those alerts. And I was telling Donna in the room that I actually found myself on the debate the other night. I follow her Twitter feed, so that's my insight into what the Democrats are thinking. Is Donna Brazile's Twitter feed. So.
And I tweet these are authentic tweets. You know what I like about Twitter? Sometimes you notice I just stop doing politics and I go in my garden and I send people photos of my tomatoes and my okra and how my roses are doing. And then I'll switch topics again and say, and look at Chip, my Pomeranian. Pootie wives, peep, peep. I tweet that to get away. And then on sports,
but you don't send that as much as Dana Perino does her dog Jasper.
Oh my God.
I mean, on Instagram, all you see are pictures of Jasper, Dana's dog.
If you met Jasper, you would send pictures of him too. I've
never met him.
I was in New York one Saturday and I said, Dana, why don't we just go out and have dinner? And we went out, and so we had to take Jasper out first. And Dana's another friend of mine. And we were on Broadway, 67th and Broadway. And Jasper decided that was the moment he needed to go. And I held up traffic for Dana to allow her dog to go. And I said, now that is real bipartisanship. And because it was one of those moments when you're like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And I'm like, stop the traffic. You pick it up. But she loves that dog, and that's a beautiful dog. Woo! But not as cute as Chip.
Staying with social media, do you think it's helpful or harmful for political life?
I think it's helpful overall because it gives people a voice and it gives individuals a way to communicate, individuals and groups, a way to communicate directly. So, for example, I was working with Bluebell during their recall. And they've been able to, at the time of the recall, they really didn't have well-established social media channels, but yet they've been able to use them very effectively to communicate with their customers as they're getting ready to go back into markets, as they're bringing product back. They've been able to send out the flavors that they're bringing back, pictures on Instagram, and it's a good direct channel of communications. Now, I don't like some of the anonymity of it. Donna probably feels this way too, but if you go on television, don't ever go and read what they say about you on those blogs below there. It's just really, it's sick. It's very personal. It's very mean. And so that's one thing I don't miss about being at a higher profile these days is all the nasty stuff that's said, particularly anonymously. So I don't like that part of it. But I do think overall it's a plus because it allows people to communicate directly. It gives you a new channel, a new vehicle, a way to make an impact.
So have you been involved with Snapchat? The thing that we can snap each other right now and in 24 hours it disappear. And then you got the Facebook. The reason why I don't like Facebook is that everybody want to be my friend, and I have criteria to being my friend. you can follow me and I can follow you. It's like, you know, once upon a time, someone following you, if you didn't know him, that was a stranger, you got to, you know. But yeah, there are so many bells and whistles now involved in what I call social media. We all live in a virtual world, virtually. I mean, I have more friends that I can count some days, and I'm like, 99 people want to talk to you. I don't know who peace. I don't know, no. So, but I love it. I really do. I've fallen in love with it. I carry, you know, when Hillary went into her email problems, I said, just admit it. Because in my purse, I have 2 phones. I have a Droid, an Android, and an iPhone, okay? Because I don't want Verizon to slow my roll, or AT&T, so I have them both. And then I carry my iPad, and I have a little computer. Oh, yeah, I am well, my ex-boss, Al Gore, did it to me. Blame him. I was with Al Gore when he used to have all of these beta things, and I was like, the RIM system. I'm like, what the? And then I started playing right along with him.
Well, I remember in the 2000 campaign, we thought it was weird because we heard that Al Gore was emailing Tipper on this little thing called a BlackBerry. And none of us had BlackBerries. By 2004, I could not imagine running a presidential campaign without my CrackBerry. And I finally was convinced it was the first piece of technology that really improved my life. Because before that, you would get paged and you'd have to go find a phone, or you'd have to go to the office, or you'd have to go get to a computer. And once I had my BlackBerry, I could be at the grocery store and I could, you know, edit a soundbite, or I could, you know, give reaction to a speech, or I could be at my son's baseball game. And so I was very reluctant to part with it, but finally this summer I did make the switch to the iPhone.
And you know, I was trying to give LSU wanted all my manuscripts and all of my Gore, and I said, the most important stuff I have from 2000 is all of these devices. And it was weird. I had all of the original devices. Remember back in the day we had pagers?
Yeah.
I had all of that.
I think that's why President Bush still does not like beeping noises, because my pager would always go off and it was always bad news.
If you could have one do-over from your career in political messaging, what would it be and what would you do differently?
Ooh. Come on.
Well, I'm known for being direct and blunt. I think that's been an asset largely in my political career, but I think I crossed the line once over to being mean-spirited. I was the executive director of the Republican Party of Texas, and Ann Richards had dallied in picking a candidate who would be the Democratic candidate for the U.S. Senate. And she didn't announce it until the first week of January, and I made what I feel really bad about now. I described the candidate, who was a really decent man, Bob Kruger, as the holiday leftovers. And I think that it got a lot of play, but it certainly was not very in keeping with my Christian faith. It was, I think it crossed the line. It was too mean-spirited. And so I kind of wanted to take it back right after I said it. But I do have a sharp tongue, and sometimes in that case, I don't think it served me well, because he was a really decent man who, it turned out he lost the race, probably not because of what I said, but he was a decent man who I think was trying to serve for the right reasons and didn't really deserve that from me.
Both of my sins were committed against the Bush family, and now I consider myself a friend of the Bush family. When I was 28 years old, and I have a sharp tongue, and razor sharp sometimes, and I said things about the then vice president that I later regretted, and I got fired by the Dukakis campaign. It was probably one of the most humbling experiences at the time, when I decided not to read the talking points because they were inadequate, and made up my own talking points. And I got fired at 5 o'clock on the nightly news. Oh yeah, nightly news. And I'll never forget, the hardest part of being fired, in addition to doing something that was not sanctioned and of course was wrong, was having to call your mom and telling her, my dad worked so hard to raise us, all 9 of their kids, and to tell my mom, I don't think anybody in my family had ever been fired. We're good workers. And that was hard. And my mother told me I would recover from it. My mother died a few weeks later, and some days I go back and think, well, you know what? That was God's way of making sure I got home as well to see my mom before she passed away. And then I did penance the next year because I'm Catholic, and I worked in a homeless shelter and then organized campaigns to make housing more affordable. In the 2000 campaign, this is when I realized I was notable but had to become unquotable. I said that Governor Bush would much rather take pictures with black children than feed them. And again, Colin Powell was the one who said, "Child, don't say that again." I said, "You're right, I won't." So I have my moments, but you know what? I have been better as a result of that. I try my best, even when folks get under my skin, and I say get under my skin, they get under my skin. I just smile through it, being as graceful. Some of the things that I've heard politicians say, some of the things people have said directly to me, I just try my best to smile through it, knowing that the best way to handle it is probably off camera and not before the camera, or to let it go and to wait for another opportunity to, correct the record, so to speak. But I'd say both Bushes, because as you know, President 41, George Herbert Walker Bush, is coming out with a book from Random House, and his political director, Ron Kaufman, is a friend of mine, and Ron and I are old neighbors on Capitol Hill, and I've had an opportunity to speak at the Bush Library and make my amends, because I believe I'm a tough, look, you people, you women in Texas, y'all think y'all tough. Y'all haven't met nobody who drank from the Mississippi River, okay? We are tough, all right? I mean, I'm tough, but I also know that I have a tender heart and a Christian faith that believes that you can ask for forgiveness, and I'm grateful that I've been able to ask for forgiveness, and still I rise, as Maya Angelou would say.
Here comes a tough question. It's
Okay.
the top one trending on Slido. What is the civic solution to record levels of polarization in Congress? What could be done?
Boy, I wish I knew. I think that we have to make our congressional districts more competitive again. The fact is, 200. I was looking at the stats the other day. I think 206 Republican seats are viewed as safe before we even have a vote.
Right.
I think it's 170 some for the Democrats, and that's just matter of fact. We accept that. So that means that on both the left and the right, the candidates are only concerned with being what they call primaried. There's a new word in Washington, primaried. They have a opposition from their own party, driving them more to either the right or the left. The way I like to put it is there's no super PAC for compromise. The super PACs are on either side. There's not one encouraging the middle. And I think the only way that we're going to have more demand for consensus is if there actually are competitive districts that don't produce just people who all they have to do is satisfy the Republican base or the Democratic base.
Well, I give this a lot of thought, and the reason why I give it a lot of thought because I'm a lame duck leader, so I'm ready to go on and do something else in my life. But I do believe that we have to not just ensure that we have more Americans voting. 12% of the American people turned out to vote in the primary campaigns of 2014. 36% of the American people voted in 2014. 37% in 2010. So one, we're not voting. In 1960, well over 62% of American people voted. By 2012, 53%. So number one, we're not voting. We're not voting. We're not participating. We're not encouraging people to vote. That alone can solve some of our problems. The second thing is our system of governance is way off. Karen is absolutely right. These are no longer competitive seats, only 17 competitive seats out of 435. These seats are gerrymandered to the point that they should be called reserved seats, reserved for Democrats, reserved for Republicans. So we have to do that. And lastly, money. Yeah. Woo! Look, say what you want about 2000 and how much money George Bush and Al Gore raised, but it's nothing in comparison to the amount of money you're going to see being spent this year, upwards of maybe $5 billion. $5 billion, and what are you getting? A Congress that doesn't work? A Congress where lawmakers cannot even get, nominees out of the hearing system. So we need to do a better job as Americans in voting. And secondly, we got to make sure that our political system is not flooded with all of this dark money, all of this super PAC money, and we got to make sure that we have candidates who are able to break through this left-right prism by appealing to the middle. That's the other little dirty secret. When Ronald Reagan through Bill Clinton, when they served in office, you had a healthy number of so-called moderates, Blue Dog Democrats or Lincoln Republicans. But whatever you call them, they were able to bring people from the left and the right together. We have no way of bringing people together these days. So we've got a lot of ways that we can fix the system, but the last thing we need to do is throw up our hands and say, I give up, because this is our government. It's about we the people, not the politicians, not the money. It's we the people.
Another trending question on Slido follows from this. And what are concrete ways to mobilize millennials? What have you seen that's worked? What can they take to their campuses?
Well, I think the best example we've seen of mobilizing millennials was what President Obama was able to do in the 2008 campaign. He was able to inspire. I disagreed with his politics. I didn't vote for him, but I remember finding myself inspired by his call for our politics to be higher and better. I mean, you know what the campaign was about. I can ask audiences all over the world, and they'll tell me hope and change. I worry now, though, that those hopes may have been dashed. So I would urge millennials not to be disillusioned. The last 7 years haven't been better. Unfortunately, there's not. I personally fault the president somewhat for not trying harder to reach across the partisan divide. I said that when he was, during the budget negotiations, only the president really has the moral authority and that power of the microphone to, I said he should have gotten in his car and gone to Capitol Hill and said, we're going to work this out, and I'm not leaving here till we do. But there's plenty of blame to go on both sides. I think it's harder for congressional leaders because they're herding cats, but there's plenty of blame to go on both sides. But I do hope that the millennials won't be discouraged. I remember standing in line at the polls voting in Austin, Texas, and there were a lot of people in that line who had never voted before, and they were young people. And President Obama was able to attract them to the polls. And I just hope that the experience of the last 7 years has not disillusioned you, because I do think you need to be involved, you need to be engaged, and every vote does count, as Donna and I learned during that Florida recount in 2000.
Canada just elected its new premier. Is it premier or prime minister, right? Mr. Trudeau, and I've been following Canada's politics in the last couple of weeks. Young man, very hopeful, very dynamic, clearly what Canada needs, especially during the winter. But you know what? He came out and said, I'm going to make sure that my cabinet looks like Canada. And I am going to appoint, even if I have to find them from the other party, I'm going to ensure that 50% of my cabinet is comprised of females. And he said, and I know it won't be difficult to find 50%. And he went out and did it. And so 2 days ago, he tweeted, somebody said, well, why did you do it? He said, because it's 2015. And I tweeted it. I said, amazing. Look, the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. That's what Eleanor Roosevelt said. She said that at a time when the country was going through war and a depression, but yet she had to give hope and encouragement to a new generation of leaders. And of course, she lived long enough to see that new generation, that flaming light of hope that came in the form of Jack Kennedy. I do believe that the future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of our dreams. And if young people, millennials, the largest demographic group of Americans who will take to the polls in 2016, if you don't see yourself as a future leader, somebody who is going to represent this great country one day on the world stage, or one day on the state, or one day at the locals, then you're not thinking about your future. This is your future, so seize it. This is your moment. So take advantage of it. You don't have to start on top. You don't need a title. You don't need anybody to even push over. Just bring in a folding chair. Take your seats at the table. This is the best time. I mean, look, I'm 55. I have no regrets about being 55. I do not want to live my 20s again. With all of that bell-bottom disco thing, I cannot do it with these knees. Thank God I can still get down. But you know what? If I had to twerk all day, I would. So y'all have at it. I'm glad I had the four tops of Supremes of Aretha Franklin, Barbara Streisand, James Taylor. I got through it. But you take your Beyonce and your Nas and Ras and whatever else you listening to and go for it. I still don't know how they made babies to that music, but that's a whole nother conversation. But what you need to do is to find your voice and to use it for the common good. America needs you. The world needs you. We're calling on you to serve. So what's holding you back? Start where you are. And there's no better time than now. Why you? Because there's no one better. And why now? Because tomorrow's not soon enough. This is your moment. I'm 55. Don't call me out retirement.
What are you going to do in retirement, Donna?
I'm a garden. Cook, stir it up. I might run for
Somehow I don't quite believe it.
Sweep it up, baby. I am the best 311 caller in D.C. There's a pothole. Is it in front of your house? No. Behind your house? No. It's 2 blocks from my house, and I have to drive past it. The park has not been raked. What? Oh, don't let me give you my tax dollars, and you think I'm going to let you get away with it?
I would not want to be your mayor.
My daddy, she brought somebody the other day because I said, I'm going to call the mayor. But my daddy was a veteran, and I care about veterans. So on Veterans Day, I'm going to volunteer to help a veteran. I am going to volunteer to make sure that we don't see our veterans on our nation's street corners. No veteran should not be living underneath the bridge. Veterans should be able to find jobs and get health care. So if you believe in something, I'm passionate about it, then you go out there and do it.
Karen, your question a moment ago was a lot of fun. Are there questions that you would like to ask each other?
Well, you know, I have one for Karen.
Uh-oh.
Oh, no, because someone asked me this question last week. I was in Philadelphia. And I was struck by the question because, you know, it's a question I don't have to ask myself because I've never been married and don't have children. Although I've raised one, and thank God she turned out to be just like me. She's a school teacher teaching in the 9th Ward. I sent her construction paper and pens for her students. So I say she turned out to be like me because she has my values. So, and I wasn't such a good mother. My friend Al used to call me Dolores. He said, you cannot feed my baby popcorn. I said, well, Al, until I learn how to cook, she's going to have popcorn. I learned how to cook. So Karen, work-life balance. I hear it all the time from women in their 30s and 40s and starting their careers, finding the jobs they want, wanting to have a family. How did you do it? And why is that important?
That's a great question. It's hard, and young women ask me this all the time. Can you have a career and a family? And I say yes. You don't have to choose one or the other, but you do have to make choices along the way. So when I met my husband, he had custody of his daughter, so I became an immediate mother when we got married. She was 9. And so I started out those choices, and then we had our son a few years later. And my husband had to have his daughter in daycare a lot when he was a single dad. And so we made the decision that we did not want our son to have to go to daycare, that one of us would always try to be home when he came home from school. And so that required choices. I worked part-time sometimes, and I was the one who was there. My husband was a lawyer, and he actually cut way back on his law practice when we moved to Austin, and I took the job at the Republican Party so that he could be the one who was home after school, and I took my son to school in the morning. It was, you know, during campaigns, as Donna knows, they're very all-consuming. I actually, when George W. Bush ran for governor, my friend Vance is in the back of the room. He'll probably remember I took the 6:30 a.m. flight, and I am not a morning person. I hate getting up early. I took the 6:30 flight a.m. to Dallas every day so that I could campaign with George W. Bush all day and get home in time to tuck my son in bed at night. And so I flew home late afternoon or early evening so that I could be there and see him. The only time that I really found that I could not make it work was when I got to the White House, and particularly in the aftermath of 9/11. I felt like weeks would go by and I was totally irrelevant to the life of my family. I would have to be there. Our first meeting was at 7:15 a.m., so I'd leave the house when my family was still asleep. I'd come home. My husband always tried to wait up for me, but my son was sometimes in bed or he was doing his homework, and anybody who has a teenager knows teenagers, you know, everybody thinks it's hard when they're young. It's really hard when they get older because teenagers are not willing to drop everything they're doing to see you because you get home. They don't care. They're off on doing their own thing. You have to be there when they want to see you or they want you to be engaged. And I remember one Saturday during my time at the White House, my son asked me to make brownies. And I was literally too exhausted. I just didn't feel like I could make brownies. And I stepped back and I thought, too tired to make brownies? What does that say about your life? What kind, and so I actually went through about a month where I was agonizing. During the day at the White House, we'd be working on such big, challenging problems that I couldn't imagine leaving. And the president had to make all these decisions, and I was one of his key people, and how could I possibly let him down? And then I'd get home and realize another day had gone by when I'd had nothing to do with my family. I was not living up to my responsibilities as a wife and mother. And so ultimately I decided that job and my ability to fulfill what President Bush had always said, if you're a wife, if you're a mom or a dad, that's your number one responsibility in life. And ultimately I concluded I was not living up to that responsibility. And so I told the president that I was going to have to move my family home to Texas. And he said the most wonderful thing you can imagine. Instead of saying, what about me? Or how can you do that to me? He said, will you still be involved? And so I was able, because of him and his gracious response, I was able to move home to Texas and advise him still from afar. And I promised him at the time that I would travel with him during the final months of his re-election campaign, which I did, because I'd always traveled with him. I believe in driving the offense of a campaign from the road with the candidate, and so I'd always traveled with him, and I went back and did that. But as you might imagine, that was the hardest decision I ever had to make, to give up a big, powerful job, to let down my friends who were my friend the president and my friends in the senior staff, which I felt like I was letting them down. So it was a really tough decision, but it was absolutely the right thing to do. We came back to Austin. My son was 15, so he had his learner's permit. And every day after school, he would come home and he'd say, Mom, will you take me driving? And I would go out and we literally spent an hour probably a day. And as I taught him to drive, I also reconnected with my son, and who is now 28 and married and still calls his mom quite a bit. So it all turned out really well. So, but thank you for that question, Donna.
Thank you.
A question for Donna?
Question for Donna. So Donna is, as you can see here, I love doing events with Donna because I find myself inspired by her passion. She is such a passionate advocate. So if you hadn't dedicated your 55 years to the political process and working in politics and community activism, what would you have done instead?
Oh, thank you. So my earliest thought in terms of what I wanted to do when I was a little girl was to be a priest.
Wow.
Catholic. And I would go to church and I was in awe. And I think of myself, and then my second one, once my mother took that out of my head, you're not going to be a priest, you are a girl. Well, you don't never know. And then it drove me to read the Bible to find other examples of what women could do, and it kept me very, what I call, passionate and for God's love and forgiveness. So I love that part of my life. My spirituality is my focus. It has always been my focus. It's where I get my energy from and where I get my love to serve from. So my next, bright idea was I'm going to be a doctor. My mother was like, okay, that's good. And then we went to a zoo. And my mother said, don't think about the species, think about the recipe. And then I started doing biology class, and that took that out of my head. Like, I'm not going to cut up nothing. I don't want to patch up nothing. So imagine the two things that then I wanted to be a lawyer. And then when that opportunity, I was like, you know what? I'm watching too much television. So, if I do believe that if what I'm doing now, the thing that gives me the most joy in my week, I'm on the road all the time. But there's Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, when I get back to Washington, I get to see 35 wonderful human beings that I met 3 months ago, and they become the love of my life. Those students, the ability to teach, to be in a setting where you can help motivate and inspire and educate another generation. I have been a teacher now since 1993. And during the Gore campaign, when Al Gore said, "You want to be my campaign manager?" I really looked at him and like, really? I spent my own money every Wednesday going back to the University of Maryland to teach my class. Southwest Airlines, that's what I could afford. But I love teaching, so that's my passion. That is my passion. Ultimately, I found my passion. That's my calling. That's what I want to do. That is what I'm going to die doing. That is what I believe most in. I love being a teacher. And Karen, my kids, you know, I have 300 kids, different daddies, of course.
Be careful how you phrase that.
I'm a liberal. Hey, if you had fun doing it, then don't complain. But you know, like today, Darius, one of my students from 2 semesters ago, I got a job. And then Kate, I'm going to Iowa, the campaign for Hillary, student last year. These are my kids. I'm on the Fulbright board because I started having kids coming to me and saying, I want to study abroad. Well, how do you do that? And then now I'm on a Fulbright. The president appointed me. So this is my passion. This is my calling. This is what I like to do. And for the rest of my life, when that day comes, they should put that I was an actress. House of Cards. The Good Wife,
You
being
were good on The
Mary
Good
Jane.
Wife. I liked that.
But then
That was
after
great.
all these years, I'm probably best suited for the Game of Thrones. Put that down in the bottom, but put up front, she was a teacher. And if I get to heaven, so I can change some rules up there and get through the pearly gates, after the trumpet, and after all the other welcoming that I will receive from my parents and my siblings. And when I get my 2 minutes with the Lord, I'm going to say, now, you know, there's this notion down there that women cannot serve as priests. And I'm only going to say 2 things. When the Lord died, who was there? Who was right outside? Who was there when he was crucified? The men had already run off. They were in the upper room. The women stayed. There's no place in the Bible where we ever ran. We always stayed. Courage. Esther. If I perish, I'm perished. I'm going to see the king. I'm going to save my people. I mean, for me, reading that Bible as a little girl gave me the greatest joy and hope of my life. Even to this day, I pray, and I always pray, weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. That is what sustains me. That's my passion. But it's also the passion that I use to serve, and it keeps you humble because there's a living God, whether you believe or not believe. Just see me if you don't have no faith, because I will tell you some things that will make you hopeful and joyful.
I want to share that something that struck a chord with me. I always say my most joyful hour of the week is I teach kindergarten Sunday school. Actually, to be more accurate, I now teach 2nd grade Sunday school because my last group of kindergartners 2 years ago made me go to 1st grade with them, and now I'm in 2nd grade, which is really uncharted territory. But I have taught kindergarten Sunday school since the early 90s, so more than 20 years. The only time I couldn't do it was when I was at the White House. But that hour every Sunday morning gives me the greatest joy. I have a little boy who comes running in my class. His name's Grady, and he says, Miss Karen, and whatever else has happened in my whole week, that's the best moment, right? But I wanted to pick up on one other thing Donna said, and that's the notion of service and servant leadership. You know, you get to the White House, and they tell you got a title, and it's assistant to the president, and that is equivalent roughly to a 3-star general, which I was horrified by because my father spent his entire career in the U.S. Army and retired as a 2-star general. And he served in 3 wars, and I knew nothing I could ever do could ever come close to his service. But they also said, well, when you get this title, assistant to the president, you get to be called honorable. And so I went home that night and suggested that from now on my son could call me Honorable Mom. And as you might imagine, that didn't go over very well. And so, at the White House, you're seated in actual order of rank importance. And so every meeting you go to, there's ranks, and you're seated in that order. And It's all very, heady stuff. But the story that I always remembered to try to keep my balance in that environment is from the New Testament in Matthew, where the mother of 2 of Jesus' 12 disciples basically pulls an end run and goes behind the backs of all the others and says, hey, can I ask you a little favor? I want my 2 kids to sit on your left and right, basically to have the best seats in the house for eternity. And so I loved that, first of all, because it's a mom and she's not asking for herself, right? She's asking for her kids. She's like, hey, I want the best seats for my kids. But the answer is what's important, and the answer is, no, that's not mine to give, but whoever wants to be great among you must seek to be a servant, just as I came to serve and give my life as a ransom for many. And so the notion of servant leadership, I tried to cling to that during my time at the White House and remember that I was there to serve the president, to serve the country, and always to try to serve in keeping with my faith. And I think Donna and I share that because she's always approached her jobs with a servant's heart. And I think it's a way to sort of navigate the tricky world of power and fame that can be very seductive.
We are so grateful for these wonderful responses this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We appreciate your candor and your inspiration and your thoughtfulness. We're really, really grateful. The Strauss Institute is going to send you all an evaluation. We really hope that you take a moment to respond and share your thoughts with us. But please join me in thanking again our wonderful speakers.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
And let's thank the staff and all of the wait staff that served everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.